November 11th, 1880. The sun had not yet risen over Melbourne. 5,000 people surrounded the old Melbourne jail. The morning fog did not stop them. They pressed their bodies against the cold iron gates. The police formed a barrier, batons ready. In the crowd, select individuals held paper tickets. They gripped them tightly. These were not invitations to a show. They were government permits to watch a man die. At first glance, a chaotic mob, but in reality, a nation holding its breath. Inside the limestone walls, the noise of the streets was muffled. A man sat alone in a dim cell. 20 pounds of iron chains bound his legs to the floor. The metal clanked against the stone. This was Edward Ned Kelly, the most feared outlaw in the Southern Hemisphere. To the authorities, a cop killer. To the poor, a revolutionary. Why was the government terrified of one prisoner? He was disarmed and wounded, but his legend threatened to turn the settlers against the state. Archival records. Note, the prisoner appeared calm. He did not ask for mercy. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor. The officials approached the cell door with the warrant in hand. 60 minutes remained. The rope was ready. The trapdoor was oiled. The crimes that split the country in two demanded a price. There was no turning back. The final hour began. June 1855. In the dust of Beveridge, Victoria, a child entered the world who would burn his name into history. Was Ned Kelly born a monster? The evidence suggests otherwise. His story began with an act of pure courage. He didn't just watch a boy drowning in the creek, he dove in. He dragged the victim to the mud bank. The reward was a sash of green silk. Ned wore it like a medal. But fate had a different script for Edward. Inside the Kelly home, the air smelled of stale whiskey and desperation. His father, John Red Kelly, fought his demons with a bottle. His mother, Ellen Quinn, looked at 8 children and saw only hunger. They were always moving. They packed their meager lives into a wagon and fled from town to town. At first glance, a family looking for work, but in reality, targets for the local police. The law watched them closely. John stole a single calf to put meat on the table. He couldn't pay the fine. The judge sent him to 6 months of backbreaking labor. The work destroyed him. The uncle fared worse. A conviction for arson, a death sentence later swapped for years of crushing rocks in a chain gang. 14 years old, Ned stopped being a child. He met Harry Power, a veteran bushranger with a scarred reputation. Harry took the boy as an apprentice. April 1870. They rode through northeastern Victoria. They stopped travelers. They demanded gold. But this was only the beginning. Ned made a clumsy mistake. He targeted a Chinese pig dealer. He took 10 shillings, but the victim did not surrender. He grabbed a heavy stick and beat the young robber. The police reports show Ned was captured, bruised, and humiliated. The court dismissed 2 robbery charges. He walked out. But the system had marked his file. Violence escalated rapidly. Police caught Ned with a stolen horse. The arresting constable did not reach for handcuffs. He attacked. He struck Ned with such ferocity that the skin split open. The skull turned into a mass of raw, bleeding meat. The boy collapsed on the road. The doctor required 9 stitches to close the wound. April 1878. That was the deadline. Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick rode to the Kelly homestead. He wanted one thing: to put Ned's younger brother Dan in chains for horse theft. But he never made the arrest. What happened inside the house remains a blur of violence. The police report stated one version. Ned kicked open the door. He raised a pistol. He fired. The bullet missed the officer's head but shattered his wrist. Then came the second blow. Ned's mother, Ellen, swung a heavy shovel. It cracked against the constable's skull. Why did the story split so sharply? The police claimed unprovoked assault, but the Kelly family swore it was defense. They said Fitzpatrick made a move on Ned's 14-year-old sister, Kate. He touched her. Ned struck back to save her honor. The court did not care about honor. Ellen Kelly received a sentence of 3 years in prison, hard labor. Ned and Dan did not wait for the handcuffs. They gathered their supplies and vanished into the bush. 2 loyal friends, Joe Byrne and Steve Hart, went with them. But they weren't just running. They were planning a shock wave. October 26, 1878. Stringy Bark Creek. Sergeant Michael Kennedy and 3 constables set up a camp in the dense Victorian bushland. They lit a fire. They checked their weapons. They were hunting the Kelly gang. At first glance, a routine patrol, but in reality, they were the prey. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The forest went quiet. The Kelly gang rushed the camp like phantoms. Constable Lonigan reached for his holster. He was too slow. Ned shot him dead instantly. Constable McIntyre threw his hands up. He stared into the black bore of the gang's guns. Kennedy and Scanlon returned from their patrol. They walked straight into the ambush. The trap snapped shut. Scanlon refused to surrender. Ned cut him down with a volley of bullets. Kennedy tried to raise his hands. The firing did not stop. Ned stepped forward. He leveled a shotgun at the sergeant's chest. At close range, he pulled the trigger. The scene was gruesome. The camera of history records the aftermath. 3 bodies lying in the dirt. Lonigan had 3 bullet wounds. 1 had passed through his right eye. Scanlon had 4 bullets in him. Kennedy had taken 2 fatal shots. The pockets were turned inside out. The corpses were looted. 3 officers slaughtered. The colony erupted in panic. The government struck back with paper. They declared the Kelly gang officially outlawed. This changed the rules of engagement. Any citizen could kill them on sight. No trial, no legal consequences. Massive rewards were posted on every wall. But Ned did not hide in a hole. He attacked. December 1878. The gang rode into Euroa. They seized a police substation. They took hostages at a local homestead. Then they cut the telegraph wires. The copper snapped. The town was isolated, deaf and blind to the world. The gang walked into the National Bank. They emptied every safe. They swept cash drawers clean. They escaped with over $2,000 in gold and currency. The authorities were humiliated, but the gang burned through the money fast. February 10th, 1880. They struck Gerald-Durie. This time, the audacity was absolute. They took the police barracks. They locked the officers inside their own cells. A strange sight appeared on the main street. Ned Kelly walked in broad daylight. He wore a stolen police uniform. He looked like the law itself. The town attended church. Next door, the gang held hotel staff hostage. They raided the bank for another $2,141. But Ned wanted more than silver. He found the mortgage papers. He found the loan documents. He lit a match. The paper turned to ash. He declared the banks were crushing the life out of the poor. With that fire, the Kelly gang became folk heroes to the struggling workers. They were warriors against corrupt oppression. To the police, they remained cold-blooded butchers. The noose was tightening. Ned knew it. He devised a defense never seen before. He took moldboards from farmers' plows, thick, heavy iron. He heated them in the forge. The hammers rang out in the bush. The gang forged bulletproof armor. Each suit weighed over 90 pounds. A breastplate, a backguard, shoulder plates, an apron. The visual evidence is terrifying. The helmets looked like tin cans. They had narrow horizontal slits for eyes. The iron was 6 millimeters thick. Ned wore the prototype. He tested it himself. The gang fired at him from close range. The armor held. Years later, the reverse dent from a bullet was still visible on his breastplate. They were no longer just outlaws. They were walking tanks. June 26, 1880. The silence broke again. Gang member Joe Byrne found the police informant, Aaron Sherritt. He raised his shotgun. The blast hit Sherritt in the throat and chest. The informant fell dead. The final war had begun. The plan was total annihilation. Ned Kelly knew the timetable perfectly. A trainload of police reinforcements was speeding toward Glenrowan. He didn't just plan a robbery. He planned to derail the locomotive, slaughter the survivors in the wreckage, and burn the police barracks to the ground. The objective was absolute chaos. The gang occupied the Glenrowan station. They weren't just armed, they were fortified. Heavy steel plates covered their chests. Even the pack horses carried bullet-resistant plating. Ned forced laborers to the line. They ripped up the rails. They broke the sleepers. The trap was set. Why did the ambush fail? The plan was technically perfect, but a local schoolteacher intervened. He flagged down the approaching train with a lantern. The brakes squealed. The derailment never happened. Instead of a crash, Ned faced a battalion. The siege exploded instantly. The sound of shattering glass and ricochets filled the air. Ned took hits immediately. A bullet through the left hand, another in the arm, a third in the foot. In the crossfire, 2 hostages fell dead. Joe Byrne stood his ground, but a police round found its mark. He dropped. Bleeding and cornered, Ned didn't surrender. He staggered into the darkness behind the inn while the cordon tightened. At first glance, the police had won, but in reality, the nightmare was just beginning. Dawn broke on June 28th. A thick mist rolled over the ground. Officers squinted into the gray haze. Something was moving. An eyewitness account survives. With steam rising from the wet earth, the figure looked like a headless monster with a thick neck. It defied logic. The Iron Devil had returned. Ned emerged from the rear flank. He was a walking tank. He fired 3 handguns, cycling through them with mechanical precision. The weight of the steel was crushing, 90 pounds of iron. Yet, he kept advancing. Visuals from the scene would show sparks flying. Police bullets struck his breastplate. Rounds bounced harmlessly off his helmet. For 30 minutes, he was invincible. Then, officers realized the weakness. The armor ended at the waist. They lowered their sights. 2 shotgun blasts erupted. Lead shot tore through his unprotected legs and thighs. The metal giant collapsed. The Iron Devil hit the dirt. Police didn't wait. They stormed the inn and set the timber ablaze. The structure turned into an inferno. When the flames died down, they searched the ashes. The charred remains of Dan Kelly and Steve Hart lay inside. Perhaps they were shot. Perhaps they chose suicide over burning. The truth burned with them. Ned Kelly was the sole survivor. Only the hangman awaited him now. October 19th, 1880. The gavel fell. Melbourne. The courtroom was packed and stifling. Ned stood trial for the murder of police constables. The jury didn't hesitate. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was absolute. Death by hanging. Judge Sir Redmond Barry looked down from the bench to finalize the proceedings. He spoke the ritual phrase, "May God have mercy on your soul." Ned didn't flinch. His reply sent a chill through the room. "I will go a little further than that and say I will see you there where I go." Was this a prophecy? It certainly seemed like one. 12 days later, Judge Barry collapsed. He was dead. The outlaw had outlived his judge by barely a week, but the public refused to accept the ending. A petition circulated through the streets. 32,000 signatures. Protesters rallied outside the prison walls shouting for a reprieve, but the authorities were deaf to the noise. On November 3rd, they set the date. 8 days left. The day before the end, Ned posed for a photograph. He wanted a keepsake for his family. The lens captured a man resigned to his fate. His mother, Ellen, was still a prisoner in the same complex. She visited him one last time. She didn't cry. She gave a final command. Die like a Kelly. November 11th, 1880, 9 in the morning. The guards entered the cell. They removed the heavy leg irons. The sound of clinking metal echoed against the stone floor. Ned walked freely for the first time in months. A chaplain accompanied him. They passed the prison garden. The footage of history describes a strange moment. Ned stopped. He looked at the blooms. He remarked on how beautiful the flowers were. These were the last living things he would ever see. Outside the gates, the city held its breath. 5,000 people gathered. Some held tickets, tight in their sweaty hands. They came to witness death. Children stood in the front rows. At first glance, a public spectacle, but in reality, a somber vigil. Inside the execution chamber, the air was cold. A heavy wooden beam held the noose. Space was tight. Only the sheriff, the doctor, and a few officials stood near the drop. The rest of the witnesses crowded into the corridors below, craning their necks. 10 o'clock struck. The executioner stepped forward. He was a man of 60. He wore no mask. He didn't bother to hide his identity. He secured Ned's arms. He pulled the straps tight at the elbows. A priest stood nearby, holding a large cross. The executioner raised his hands. He placed the rope over the beam. He looped the hemp around Ned's neck. The knot was adjusted. There was no turning back. Historians still debate the final seconds. What were Ned Kelly's last words? Some sources claim he muttered a stoic phrase, "Such is life." Others reported a sigh of resignation. "Ah, well, I suppose it has come to this." One account suggests he prepared a speech, but in the end, he chose silence. 5 minutes past 10. The signal was given. The lever was pulled. The sound of the trapdoor crashing open filled the room. Edward Ned Kelly plunged through the floor. It was an 8-foot drop. The rope went taut. His neck snapped instantly. Silence followed. The doctor checked for a pulse. There was none. When they removed the white hood, the face was revealed. It appeared placid. There was no discoloration, no sign of agony. Only a slight rope mark remained under his left ear. 30 minutes passed. They lowered the body into a rough hospital cart. They wheeled him to the dead house. The most infamous outlaw in Australian history was gone. But death was not the finale. It was merely a checkpoint. The story of the man ended here. But the story of the body was just beginning. It would spark a macabre journey spanning over a century. 1 hour. That was all it took for the macabre work to begin. Immediately following the execution, Maximilian Kreitmeyer arrived at the prison. The proprietor of Waxworks brought his tools and his plaster. He did not waste time. He shaved Ned's head. He removed the iconic beard. Then, he applied the wet plaster directly to the corpse's face. The death mask froze the outlaw's final expression. The cast reveals a face surprisingly at peace. The eyes remain open and bright. There are no contorted muscles, no signs of suffering. The authorities buried the body in the yard of Old Melbourne Jail. It lay there, undisturbed, for decades. But 1929 changed everything. The jail closed. The government ordered the relocation of the graves. What followed was not a solemn transfer. It was a public horror show. Workmen began the excavation. The wood of Kelly's coffin was rotten and weak. As the crane lifted the earth, the casket shattered. Bones tumbled out into the open pit. Why did the crowd react with such savagery? Usually, the dead command respect. But the legend of Kelly turned ordinary citizens into scavengers. The mob swarmed the grave from every direction. People jumped into the dirt. They grabbed ribs, vertebrae, and finger bones. They stuffed them into pockets as souvenirs. It was a grotesque free-for-all. Lee, the site foreman, saw the chaos. He spotted the skull rolling in the dust. He lunged. He managed to seize the head just before it disappeared into the crush of the crowd. The Victorian Premier was furious. He ordered an immediate investigation. He pleaded with the citizens to return the stolen remains, but the mob kept their trophies. The skull did not return to the earth. Instead, it sat on a detective's desk. It became a paperweight, a grim trophy. Finally, in 1931, it moved to the Australian Institute of Anatomy in Canberra. It remained there, on and off display for 40 years. But this was only the beginning of the mystery. 1978. The skull was back at Old Melbourne Jail. Then, a thief struck. The glass shattered and the skull vanished again. It stayed missing for over 3 decades. Events took a strange turn in 2009. A farmer from West Australia came forward. He handed over a skull. He claimed it was Ned's. At first glance, the case was closed. But in reality, it was a case of mistaken identity. Forensic teams began testing in 2010. They drilled for DNA. The results were a shock. The skull did not belong to Ned Kelly. It likely belonged to Frederick Deeming, a serial killer hanged in 1892. The real breakthrough happened elsewhere. In 2008, archaeologists were digging at the former Pentridge prison site. They uncovered a mass of skeletal remains. Science took over. DNA analysis narrowed down the candidates. The examination of the bones provided the final proof. The leg bones bore specific damage. These were the healed scars of bullet wounds received during the Glenrowan siege. Scientists confirmed the identity beyond doubt. They had found Ned Kelly's body. Yet, the puzzle remains incomplete. To this day, the majority of the outlaw's skull is still missing. 132 years. That was the time between the hangman's noose and the final rest. In 2012, the Victorian government finally signed the papers. They approved the return of Kelly's remains to his descendants. It was not a simple handover. It was the closing of a century-old file. On January 20th, 2013, the hearse arrived at Greta. A requiem mass was held. The atmosphere was heavy with history. Ned's bones were lowered into consecrated ground, right beside his mother's unmarked plot. But the family took no chances. The footage shows workmen pouring heavy layers of concrete directly over the coffin. Why did they seal the grave? It seemed excessive, but the threat of theft was real. Souvenir hunters would have dug up the earth for a piece of the outlaw. The concrete barrier ensured that Kelly stayed in the ground. But this was only the beginning of the debate. Ned Kelly remains a fracture in the timeline. To some Australians, he was a hero, a rebel standing tall against corrupt colonial oppression. To others, he was a butcher, a vicious murderer who gunned down 3 police officers in cold blood. At first glance, a criminal record, but in reality, a war over the national soul. The story transcended the bush. It became a myth. The phrase, "as game as Ned Kelly," entered the local lexicon. It became shorthand for bravery. It proved that the outlaw had embedded himself in the collective consciousness. His rebellion mirrored a young nation searching for identity after the British Empire began to fade. Art immortalized the violence. Sidney Nolan's paintings captured the square iron helmet. Films and books retold the standoff at Glenrowan. The legend is feared and celebrated in equal measure. The story cut off here. If you want the unvarnished truth of history's darkest chapters, subscribe to The Veil History. We uncover the brutal executions. We expose the notorious criminals. We dig up the events the history books tried to bury. Do not miss the next investigation. Hit the bell icon. Join the community. Thanks for watching.